right. Are we going to get going here? It's
Weird.
giving me the circle of death.
As my dad would say, it's sick and simple.
Yeah.
Come on. There we go. All right. We are theoretically live. Okay. And let's begin with prayer. Lord God, we give you thanks for gathering us together around your word. We ask you, Lord, to open your word to us. Help us to understand it, and more importantly, to be able to apply it to our lives. This we ask in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
So I was at a pastor's meeting today, and I was telling Pastor Greg what we were doing for Bible study, and he gave me a couple of new ones that I hadn't even thought of. So I've added those to the bailiwick now. Yeah. Yeah, it's a couple of kids. I don't know if you know Pastor Greg, but he's very quirky.
And
And
in Oak Grove?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
He's
so
a good guy.
Yeah, he seemed like
he's
a
a
really
very funny
He
guy.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Named his son Friedrich Boniface.
Oh no.
Really?
Yeah, Friedrich Boniface. Boniface is his favorite saint, and Friedrich was the, I guess, named after. I can't remember if it was named after the King of Prussia or who
Yeah,
it
it
is,
could be Frederick
or maybe it's a
Saxony.
family name. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Wasn't it the first name was Chopin?
What's that? Oh, I don't know.
Friedrich?
Could be. I don't know.
That's German.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I was speaking of Frederick of Saxony. My son's father-in-law and mother-in-law stopped by to see us yesterday,
Oh.
and he's a coin collector, and they were actually out here for a work thing, but they flew in and flew out the same day. But they came by and saw Lauren and Danya and all of them went out to lunch. But he found a Frederick of Saxony coin.
Really?
At a coin thing. Yeah, he has a Frederick of Saxony coin. I had no idea that Frederick of Saxony had his own coins,
I
but
didn't either.
yeah, apparently he did. And he bought it and has it. And he said it's not, it's not a super valuable coin or anything, but
It's cool.
it's cool. Yeah, it's cool to have. Yeah. And he also
Can
found,
you say how much you paid for it?
I think he said 100 and something.
Oh, that's
It
not
wasn't,
too
it wasn't,
bad.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then he also found, in fact, coming up this Sunday is the parable Jesus talks about the widow's mite.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the Pharisees are all thrown in. The temple had great big, think of the opening of a tuba. They had those great big things that you threw the money into,
Oh, yeah.
and it made a lot of noise. And so the Pharisees loved to throw piles and piles of change in there and have everybody go, oh, yay. Yeah, probably. But then the widow comes up and she has these two mites, which are less than a cent. I mean, very, very. And Jesus points out and says, while you gave out of your abundance, she gave everything she had. So who's the greater gift giver here? Is the widow, and he found two of those little mites from 100 BC, and he bought those. And he says they're not in great condition or anything because but he said that it's just fun to have. I mean, he collects mostly just for fun, not because they're not investment pieces or anything like that. He just collects for fun. But he and his son, they actually fly around and go to coin shows and things like that because he's so into it. But really, I'd love to see the collection one of these days if we ever get up to New Jersey. It'd be a cool thing to see.
And who is this? This is,
Neil's father-in-law, Lauren's parents.
oh.
Yeah. Yep. They're from New Jersey. Yeah.
I thought her
Yeah.
plates are Maryland.
She was living in Maryland, working in Baltimore. Well, she actually worked in Washington D.C., but she lived in Baltimore. Yeah, they live in New Jersey though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep. So, I got back from my train trip to Harrisburg.
Oh, you took a train?
It was so much fun.
Oh, yeah?
I love the train, and the people you meet on the train.
Oh,
It's
yeah. nothing.
nothing like it. I mean,
Where's Harrisburg?
Eastern Pennsylvania. About
Why'd
an
you go
hour. Had a board of directors meeting
Oh.
for the district. It takes. There's only two airlines I think that fly into Harrisburg, and in order to, I mean, everybody there was talking about. Yeah, I had to go through Charlotte. I had to go through Houston. I had to go.
Yeah.
There's no direct route anywhere to get to Harrisburg.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I thought, well, if I'm going to spend hours and hours and hours sitting and waiting, I'd rather do it on a train than
How long
sit
was
in
the
an
train
airport.
ride?
It's a long time. I left here at 6:45 on Thursday night
Okay.
and got into Harrisburg at about 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon.
Oh
So
my
it wasn't too
goodness,
bad.
so you're talking like 36 hours.
No, it was Thursday night to
Oh,
Friday afternoon.
okay,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
Not
It was
quite.
like
Not quite.
18 hours.
18 hours, yeah, 17, 18 hours, yeah.
Nothing like 30 hours to San Antonio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fun.
What, did it run on time though?
Oh, I love
Was
it.
the Amtrak timely?
It was on time. The
'Cause so
long,
many times I'd take it to Ann Arbor and it was, oh God, it was painful. It was always stopped for freight trains. It was brutal. Brutal.
the only time I've had that experience is on the Texas Eagle, is getting pulled over on freights.
Yeah, we were late.
Uh huh.
You
You're
were?
almost always
Isn't it
late. On
brutal when you're just sitting there and you're like, oh
No.
my God.
I
No,
don't
you didn't
know.
think so?
I didn't care.
I have
If I
my
was gonna sit there.
I had my laptop. I got all kinds of work done.
Yeah.
I had a couple books that I read. I loved it. I had a seat to myself all the time, which was nice. I mean, if you're packed in, it's not as much fun. But
Yeah. Oh, tell us about the people on the train.
Yeah.
my favorite, there's several of them that were fun. One of them was, B movies. You know what I mean when I say B movies? You know, the low budget.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and this guy he lives in Chicago, and he makes B monster movies. And he listed a whole bunch of them, and I've never heard of any of them.
Yeah.
But he says there's a website or a streaming service called Shudder, Shutter, that a lot of his movies are on. And I mean, the things that Creature of the Black Lagoon, you know, that was a typical B movie that was, you know, that got some legs, but I don't know if any of his have ever had legs. But he was very interesting.
Pretty sure the Black Lagoon, wasn't that a big one? Or was that the Green Lagoon?
No, it was
No, that
it,
was one.
it was a B
Creature
movie.
from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah.
That
That-
It kind of was
yeah.
along the lines of like
Maybe.
the Living Dead.
Yeah, Night of the Living Dead kind of thing.
Yeah, it was about
So anyway, I
that.
met him, and he was a riot. And then there's the best outfit of the train. You have to do different categories. You know,
Okay.
the best outfit is this lady was a very very large lady, and she was dressed. She had bright pink hair. I mean pink, bright, way brighter than what you think of when you think pink, and she was dressed in her pajamas, and her slippers, and a giant bathrobe.
Good
A
for her. She was
giant
gonna
pink
sleep the whole
bathrobe
time.
with
Yeah.
big pink strawberries all over it. I thought, never in an airport would you ever see her. Only on the train would you get to see that.
Walmart. She probably just got out of Walmart.
Oh, she was funny. Yeah, yeah.
Could you sleep? Did you?
I do. Yeah, I sleep
You
fine.
sleep just fine. Do they have like little cars where you can, like, let's say you wanted to take a trip and like you can get your own car so you can sleep?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, you can
They
get sleepers.
They do. They have sleepers.
when Danya and I went to Memphis last time, we got a sleeper.
Really?
And I think in this spring we're gonna come home from Arizona on the train. We're gonna fly out there, and then we're gonna come home on the train, and we're gonna get a sleeper for that. Yeah, I have to decide whether we're gonna take the Texas Eagle or the. I've never been on the northern
The
route.
northern one,
I'm
yeah.
trying to think of what it's called.
I can't even remember.
But anyway, it goes through the Rocky. It's more
Yeah.
scenic
Yeah.
than the
If you
Texas
get
Eagle.
a car though, then you don't get a seat, right? You have to just stay in your car.
So you don't talk to people, but
You
you
can
can
go-
go to the dining car.
Yeah, you can go to the
Yeah.
dining car, you can go to the
Yeah.
club car,
Yeah.
but you don't have a regular seat. No.
Yeah.
Although there's plenty of regular seats. If you wanted to go sit in one, you could. But
Yeah.
you know, yeah, I slept from Pittsburgh. I used to tend to change trains in Pittsburgh because took the Capital Limited to Pittsburgh and then the Pennsylvanian from there to Harrisburg, and so we got into Pittsburgh coming back about midnight. No, about 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. And then the next train, the Capital, didn't leave until midnight. So I did have that was the only bad part. Is I had like a 4-hour wait in the train station. And Pittsburgh is not a beautiful place to wait. And it's not like Union Station. You know, we have Union Station; it's gorgeous. Even Harrisburg has a really pretty station. But Pittsburgh is just really like a Trailways Greyhound waiting room kind of thing. So that was the only downside, was having to wait for a while. But it wasn't bad. I watched a couple shows on my phone, and that was no big deal. And then I slept. I think I was asleep before we left Pittsburgh, and I slept until I woke up somewhere in Indiana. Yeah. So, yep, I'm a big fan of trains. I tell Danya all the time, the day I retire will be the last airplane I get on.
Really?
Yeah. Yep, because once I have the time that I don't have to worry about time.
So did you take the metro then into the city?
I did.
Just cross it.
Mhm.
Cross the
Yeah, just
street?
walk down the Union Station.
Station.
Yeah.
You just walk across the street, don't you?
It's 2 blocks.
Yeah.
You got to go about 2 blocks down to Union Station. Yeah. Yep, that was, and boy, Chicago is not what it used to be. But, you know, I mean, unfortunately, our last couple of mayors have not done us any favors. But we are still a pretty nice city compared to Pittsburgh.
Constantine and Cha-Cha went down 3 different days,
Uh-huh.
and they were impressed how clean it was, because
Yeah.
they say Germany is not clean anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, I mean, it's, you know, that's the first time I've been downtown on the streets in a long time because COVID and all, you know, so, but, it was nice. You know, it's very clean, felt very safe. It really felt more like back in the early 2000s when, you know, we would go down with the kids and we'd walk around and we didn't think anything of going down to Ogilvy and walking over to the museum campus, and we never felt unsafe or anything. But lately, but then they just had I just heard on the news today, they had somebody shot at Navy Pier.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
I haven't heard anything more than that someone shot at Navy Pier. Yeah, so I don't know.
There is no safe place.
One of these days, we've got to stop. We got to convince people to stop shooting people.
Yeah,
I don't know how we do that,
you're in charge.
but you know, I know there's no easy answer. There's no one size fits all, but we got to figure it out because it's ridiculous. All right, we are in Daniel chapter 5. This is a fun one today. Daniel chapter 5. Daniel's one of the big major prophets in the Old Testament. Written has more Aramaic in it than any other book in the Old Testament, as opposed to most of the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. Daniel is written, of course, mostly while he's in Babylon. He's exiled into Babylon, so much of it is written while he's in Babylon. So it's much more in Aramaic than in Hebrew. All right, Daniel chapter 5. Let's read the first 4 verses. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives and their concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Okay, so it says that he's the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but he's not really. He's really the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar is Nabonidus' son. Nabonidus is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar's probably the famous one. He's the one who takes them into exile. He's the one who brings Daniel and says, "You're going to be." He takes the Babylonians, like the Romans, would take the best and the brightest when they conquered a country, and they'd take the best and the brightest and take them in exile and leave the peasants back in the country they conquered to work, because you want that country to generate income. So it wasn't, when you talk about the exile, it wasn't like all of the people of Israel were taken to Babylon. It was really the best and the brightest, the servant, the lords and the masters, not the servants. They stayed in Israel and worked the land and made money for the Babylonians. But Daniel was one of the best and the brightest, and so he was one of the ones that was taken. And so Nebuchadnezzar, you remember, he was the king that did that. Mm-hmm. Nebuchadnezzar, we'll find out what happened to him in a little bit here, but then his son Nabonidus took over for him, and Belshazzar is the son of Nabonidus. Oftentimes in the Bible, when it says father, his father, it might be more than one generation. They referred to every man in the family before you as the father, or fathers, I guess, sometimes. It seems like what we have here is a grandson showing off for his friends, while his father's out somewhere conducting business or fighting a war, we don't know what. And in order to really, really show off, he brought the sacred vessels from the temple to drink wine out of. Okay, these were pretty amazing vessels. If you read in Leviticus how the vessels are made, I mean they're amazing pieces of art and encrusted in jewels and gold and silver and all this. And so, you know, I don't know what we would compare it to. Maybe you know, some kind of, you know, we don't have that kind of stuff anymore. The thing that I think of when they talk about this is what we in the Missouri Synod have is Walther's chalice. So we have the chalice that they brought over from Germany, which is a beautiful golden chalice with jewels all around it that they used for years at Trinity Lutheran Church in St. Louis, where Walther was the pastor. CFW Walther was the sort of the father of the Missouri Synod. There was a group of that he led coming from Saxony, Germany, to immigrate, and they came up on the Mississippi River and settled in Perry County, Missouri. And if you ever want some Lutheran history, take a weekend and go to Perry County, Missouri, and they have tours and all kinds of museums, and they've added on. They had the museum in Altenburg. They've added on to. Donnie and I saw it when we were down there in the summer, or in September. I mean, visiting Neil's godparents. They took us to it because they've added this huge section onto it, and it's a nice little museum for the Saxon Lutherans. Came in. So anyway, so we have this jeweled chalice that, of course, now is so expensive that we can't ever use it. So now it comes out once a year or maybe twice a year. The insurance company requires they have an armed guard there while it's out, you know. I mean, you know, so you get it's unfortunate. But same thing with our rare books in St. Louis. You know, we have Bach's Bible and we have things like that. But you can't see it because the insurance companies, in order to insure it, require you to pay for so many security protocols and all. What they do at the seminary is once every 4 years they bring out the rare books so that you can see it one time while you're on campus. You can get to at least see it once and see all the rare books and all in the stuff that we have there.
Such a shame though, because it's like, what's the point of having it if you can't use it?
You know, it's history,
What is the point?
historical, and for research. I mean, you can go to the Concordia Historical Institute. You can apply to do research there, and you can get into the rare books room as a researcher.
No, I'm talking about the chalice.
Well, yeah. What do you do with that? You know,
Yeah, I mean,
it's sort of like here. For years, we had beautiful sterling silver communionware, and apparently it got stolen more than once. And finally, they replaced it with what we have now, which is pewter, which nobody wants. And you know, and honestly, the chalice that Jesus used at the Lord's Supper was probably wooden or clay. You know, I mean, he would never have. What's that?
I said at least it wasn't plastic.
Yeah, right. Right, wasn't plastic. Yeah, I mean, probably the one Jesus used was either clay, it was pottery, or it was or wooden, because they would never have been able to afford anything kind of hammered metal or anything like that. So we do that, and it is nice to have beautiful communionware. The church I was at this past weekend has gorgeous communionware, and they have a pour. This is what they do. They don't do individual cups because this pastor is very liturgical and absolutely despises the little shot glasses. But he has bowed, and plastic, and he has bowed to the cultural desires. And what they have is beautiful glass, maybe crystal. I don't know. I didn't use it, so I didn't get to touch it. But little glasses, and so when you go to communion, you pick up your own little glass, and then they have a pouring chalice, and it's a chalice that has a long stem on it. And so if you want your own little individual cup, you hold your little chalice up, and then the assistant comes and fills it for you. Yeah, and then they have the regular chalice, which is what I took, so I didn't see the... I thought about doing the other one just so I could see how it worked, but... Yeah.
Should have gone back through a second.
Yeah, right.
I sinned on my way back to the pew.
Yeah, they didn't... Their wine wasn't very good, though, so our wine's much better. Yeah, so I didn't want seconds. So anyway, so we have that. I suppose that would be the closest thing we would have, would be like Walther's chalice. And so imagine Walther's chalice and some college kid decides he's going to have a kegger with his friends and grabs Walther's chalice to drink out of. That's what this is like. The Belshazzar takes the holy vessels of the temple out to drink with his friends, which is, and this is one of those times what we're going to see is we see what God does to people who mock him. Okay. And we have to be very careful, because as Christians, it is a great temptation to think we need to defend God. We always want to argue with people about what they're wrong about with God. And we have to remind ourselves that God is a big boy and can defend himself quite nicely, that he does not need us to defend him. And this is a great example of how that happens. God takes care of what needs to be taken care of. Let's look at verses 5 through 12. This is the case of they're drinking with the holy vessels and having a good time. Immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. Well, I suppose so, if you see a disembodied hand writing on the wall. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chalcedons, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Well, he's second ruler, so that's right below him. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. The queen, and there's a text note there if you have a study Bible, it's probably the grandmother, it's probably Nebuchadnezzar's widow. The way because of some of this stuff, but it's probably not his mother. Because of the words of the king and his lords came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, "O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you, or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him, and King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chalcedons, and astrologers, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation." Okay, so yes, a disembodied hand writing on the plaster certainly would be disconcerting. We can all understand that. And he calls all of his magicians, and they can't help him. What does that remind you of, calling the magicians? Right.
The Exodus.
Right, the Ten Commandments, right, the Exodus, yeah. Because that's when Moses goes in and the Pharaoh keeps trying to match him,
Some of them did, I think.
And they did. Yeah, there were a couple of them that did, right. I love the one where the staff turns into the serpent, and then the magicians make their staff turn into a serpent, and then Moses' staff eats their serpent. That's perfect. That's perfect symbolism right there. Yeah, that's a great scene. So the magicians can't help him, but the grandmother, Nebuchadnezzar's widow, remembers Daniel, okay, who has interpreted dreams for Nebuchadnezzar in the past, and so she says, "Call Daniel," and so he does. In verse 13, then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah? I have heard of you that the spirit of the gods," now if you have a text up there, that could be spirit of God, capital G, or it could be spirit of the gods. It's just hard to tell in the Hebrew, "is in you, and the light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of this matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. What's the clothes with purple thing there?
Royalty.
Royalty.
Yeah, because remember, purple is extremely expensive because you have to gather these little shellfish in the Caribbean or the Mediterranean. I mean, and you have to gather so many of them to dye a bolt of cloth that it's a very expensive process, and so that's why kings are clothed in purple. It's always entertaining to me, anyway, how people who mock God and think they're superior to Christians suddenly turn to Him when they're no longer in control of their lives. So 5 minutes ago, he was mocking God and drinking out of the vessels. The disembodied hand shows up, and suddenly who's he call on? Daniel, who's known as a follower of this God, to help him out. I think, personally, that it's very difficult to be patient with such people. It's very difficult. I think that's hard not to give tit for tat. When they have mocked God, when they have said things that are, they make them as though they are superior to us because we have this faith that they think is sort of like kindergarten stuff, and we don't live in the real world. And then suddenly, and this was something I dealt with a lot as a hospital chaplain. It was hard because I was sent to minister to everybody who wanted to see a chaplain. And it was not my position or my or the expectation that I would question them on their faith. If they asked to see a chaplain, I went to see them. Sometimes it was for things like, I can't get the nurse to listen to me, because they learned that chaplains have an in, and that chaplains can get around as nurses sometimes and things like that. Or I can't, or sometimes it was, I can't reach my family. Can you try to reach my family for me, because they're saying that no one's answering the phone. Or, there was one time when I literally drove to a house and knocked on the door and said, your mother's in the hospital. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, should we come? Oh, no. She just wants you to know. She wanted to know what address to send the pizza to. Yeah. So things like that, the chaplain's used for. But a lot of times, I would say more than 80% of the time, when you get there, they're scared, and they want to see the chaplain because they're scared for whatever reason. They're sick, or they're dying, or they're facing surgery, or whatever. And sometimes those people are the people who had no time for religion. They had no time for God. They thought it was kind of stupid, kind of silly. And suddenly, when they're faced with bad stuff, they want the chaplain. And it was really, really hard sometimes to put on the Christian face and to treat them with love and respect, even though you knew that they had not treated you or your God with love and respect before. And so this is a case where Daniel is faced with this, is that this guy has hauled the communion ware, basically, for his drinking party, and now he's getting what's coming to him, and he's calling Daniel to help him.
Bail him out.
Our calling as Christians is to proclaim the gospel no matter what. Okay, that's our calling. Our calling is to proclaim the gospel. Sometimes we use the law to get to the gospel, because sometimes people have to recognize that what they're doing is violating the law. But the law is only our tool to get to the gospel. The law is the tool that drives the person to repentance. You want to get that person to the point of saying, and it's very dicey, right? Because you can't just beat them over the head with the law, because then they'll just walk away. And then so you have to figure out how to speak the law in a way they can hear it. And what's even better is if you can lead them to it, as opposed to telling them, what you're doing is wrong. So when someone comes to me and says, well, it's such and such a sin, you know, whatever it is they're concerned about. My first question is always back to them: what does the Bible say? You know, and then they'll say, I never read that. I say, well, let's look it up. Let's look and see what we can find about it. And we'll go through the Bible and we'll find passages that speak to whatever the question there is, and they'll say, oh, yeah. So that's what God says about that, huh? Yeah. What do you think? Yeah, I think it's a sin. I agree with you. Now we can get to the gospel. Okay, now we can tell them, you know, the promise. Remember, the law. For me, it's always handy to remember SOS. The law shows us our sin, where we have failed. You know, where we have failed to do or not to do what God says. The gospel shows us our Savior, the promise of Christ, the promise of forgiveness. We'll talk about Sunday. In the sermon on Sunday, I'm going to preach on the Hebrews text because I've preached on the other two, 17 million times. The widow's mite and and then the widow of Zarephath is the Old Testament reading, in the famine. Although we'll talk a little bit about the widow of Zarephath, but the Hebrews text, it talks about how Christ died once for all, and he did it right the first time. Okay, it's there's no question of your salvation. The only question is, do you know it? Do you know it? So many people don't know it. Where was I? I was on the train somewhere. I have many train stories. And this man was talking. He was standing beside me. We were waiting to get on, I guess, and he was talking to some other person, and he was telling her about Job, and he was talking about how God took everything away from Job, and God gave Job diseases, and God did this, and Job, and he looked at me and says, "What do you do?" The pastor. Oh, do I have it right? I said, kind of. Actually, the devil did all that, not God. I said, we have to keep that straight. God let the devil have his way up until Job's death. He wouldn't let him kill Job. I said, but yeah, it was kind of funny that this guy was, and he told me he was, he was, which is often the case, he was a pastor too. But not one that was ever been trained or had a congregation. But you're dealing with different traditions, and in the Baptist tradition, all you have to do to be a pastor is have a following, which in some ways is okay, because that's really what a pastor is a person that a group of Christians have called to be their spiritual leader. We put, as Lutherans, we put great priority on education. We always have. I mean, as part of our German heritage, is education's a big deal. So for us, to be a pastor in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, you have to go through a lot of education. But I had a friend in high school who was a pastor at 16, and he served a little congregation in a double-wide mobile home out in the country. And he said that the Lord called him and to be a pastor, and these people followed him, and and that's.
Yeah, but would you really want to be the one leading them down the wrong path? I mean, you got to think about that.
I got to believe that the Holy Spirit can talk out of Balaam's ass, so he can talk out of anybody. The old story of Balaam, he gets thrown off his donkey, and the donkey looks at him, which in the Old Testament, the King James is the ass, Balaam's ass. And the donkey tells him what's up, because God speaks to the donkey.
God actually speaks to the donkey.
Yeah.
Really.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we went through
That's
that.
why I always tell people whenever they complain about something, that if God can speak through Balaam's ass, he can speak through me. So there you go.
Did you wear your collar on the train?
Yeah. I was
No,
curious about
ma'am.
that As well.
Oh.
I do not. I travel
That would
incognito.
be so annoying. I bet everybody
I assumed you did.
No. Well, first of all, it's not
everybody
very
on the train
comfortable.
who passed you because they got nothing better to do. So
I would probably get a
questions
seat
are-
to myself.
Yeah.
Everybody would come.
No, everybody
Yeah.
you'd have like a line. You'd literally have a
You
line.
could be a chaplain.
Yeah,
Confessional.
you would.
Yeah.
Freight train confessionals. That's probably true. I don't know.
Because
It's
they got nothing better to do, and you're all on what's like,
And there's not a
Just had this question. I'm gonna go ask this guy. Why not?
Yeah.
You
I've
know.
always been meaning to ask the pastor.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can get some followers on the train, maybe.
I could start like a little traveling church. Yeah.
Just travel around the country in the
Amtrak chaplain.
Yeah.
Amtrak chaplain.
Reminds me of on our way
Oh
back,
my God, that could be a movie.
on our way on the train back from Texas with the youth group. Everybody who was on that train was a youth because it was a gathering of 25,000 kids on their way home, and Chicago is a big hub,
Yeah.
and so the whole train was filled with kids. Well, except for this one poor atheist that was on the train. And she was just fit to be tied with all these kids. They're running around, they're singing church songs, they're talking about Bible stuff. Some of them are in her face about Christianity, the club car. And of course, she can't just sit in her seat and be quiet. She has to go, poke the bear. And I hear a bunch of nonsense. And so I go back to the club car to find out what's going on. And she looks at me and she says, "What is this?" And I said, "Madam, this is your worst nightmare."
She started yelling about those itty bitty little Christian kids.
Yeah.
She was like tearing on and on and on.
Uh-huh.
And you said to her, "You know those itty bitty little kids? I'm their itty bitty little pastor."
She was so rude that I finally went and talked to the conductor, and loved it. A number of other people did too. And we stopped in Arkansas, and they escorted her off the train.
Oh, really?
And so the atheist was thrown off the Christian train in Hope, Arkansas.
She was doing that thing that little children do, that when they collapse their knees. They
Yeah.
were literally carrying her up.
Yeah, the police were literally carrying her off the train.
What do you do for her? I'm trained.
Yeah.
It was entertaining.
Oh, that poor lady.
Why
Yeah.
didn't they just put her like in like a sleeper car? Or
Well, they
something?
suggested that.
Yeah,
They
hey, why don't you just go in here and stay in
Yeah.
here until?
she wanted to be in their faces, and she wanted to be.
She was saying very
I'm free,
inappropriate
I can
things.
do whatever I want.
Well,
Yeah.
that's like a demo. Okay, sorry, but but like you know who I'm talking about. Like they always gotta like get like talk about it and like get in your. It's like I don't need to talk about it, but like it's weird. The people who like aren't right are usually the ones who need to prove that they are. Did you ever notice that?
I think it's
Like, I
more.
don't know what it
I agree
is.
with you to some extent, but I think that
Okay.
it's more that the only way that you are able not to be that way, at least in my opinion, is through the power of God. The only way that I am able to swallow what I want to say and be quiet is because I have to remember that I represent Christ, and I don't want to say what they quote unquote deserve, to be told. And so with the atheist woman on the train, I tried to be very polite to her. I tried to be very kind. The train people tried to be very kind to say, why don't we go and why don't you go up here? And there's none of the kids are up here. They had, I think they up in the front they had a car somewhere where there weren't so many kids. And
The atheist crap.
yeah, the atheist car. And so but the club car on an all night train is going to be full of kids.
Yeah.
That's what they're going to do. They're going to hang out in the club car and hang out in the dining car, or not the dining car, but the cafe car.
But she wouldn't move?
No, it was her right to be there.
It was her race.
Yeah, and so the kids were not mean or bad or anything, but they were annoying. That's what kids are.
Can I ask you a weird question? On Halloween, I had lots of trick or treaters this year.
Is that darts or voting?
I hope it's Trump.
Darts are not on tonight.
Oh, what are they cheering about?
I'm gonna go.
The election people, yeah, go find out.
I'll just wander down the hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not close.
There was two kids, and I'm like, they got to be Democrats. They got no, because they are like from that liberal shit. Because they seemed to me they're making fun of it. The one was dressed as the Pope, and another one was dressed as like a monk, like with the brown and the big one cross. And I opened the door, and they're like, "God bless you, God bless you." And I don't know why, but it made me mad. But I told myself, they're kids, Val, chill out.
Yeah.
That's what I told myself. Let it go. And I'm like, okay, here's your candy.
Right.
But and then there's rocking, God bless you. But like they were laughing.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. There's something like I felt like they were mocking religion and Catholic, but those kind of values. Like that's what I.
You should have thanked them.
Yeah, and giving
You're
them
right.
a catechism. And here's your catechism instead of in lieu of
A
candy,
little
since you're
candy.
so religious.
Oh, it would have been great. You don't want to go with your costume? I got something for
Here's
you.
a Bible for you.
Yeah.
and-
Oh, that would have been better.
Actually, CPH publishes. They put stuff out that you can hand out at
I'll bet you chocolate
at
frosting
Halloween.
and stuff like that, I bet you could get,
Yeah. Well, they publish like little tracts, little pamphlets
Yeah,
that you can hand out at Halloween. That people sometimes think that's a great thing to do. We didn't get any. I don't think we got any. I was gone.
That's because you guys I've noticed there's a route, the inner route. That's where they all go to you go where you can maximize. And I feel
I
like
didn't interrupt them, I just was trying to.
I feel like you're kind of we're on the perimeter,
Yeah,
and you're on the extreme perimeter.
yeah, because we got the alley that separates
Yeah,
us.
and there's nothing you can't maximize. That's what I was thinking.
Could maybe have something to do with Daniel leaving Zeke outside.
Yeah.
Oh, you think?
Right, yeah.
Neil and I are thinking that next year Halloween's on a Friday, so Neil and I are thinking next year we might do something like a maze or something like that for fun, something different.
That's fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Being his camouflage under the leaves and jump on.
he loves scaring people. Okay,
Say real quick, what was going on?
I didn't ask them, I was just trying to eavesdrop.
Okay.
then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation." So this is great here because Daniel says much the same thing that Peter says later on when people try to tell Peter if you don't preach right, you're not going to get the offerings, and Peter says, "Oh, well, take your money and go to hell." He says it nicer than that, but that's essentially what he says. And Daniel says the same thing here in a nice way. He says, "Yeah, I'm not working for you. I'm not your little monkey that does tricks. I'll help you, but you can't buy my help." It reminds me a little bit too of Bishop Patelko. I loved it when he came to work for us. The council asked him, "How much will you charge us?" And he looked at him and says, "Oh, you can't afford me." And he told me, he says, "But I do like to go to London every year with my wife." And he says, "So I need to make this much money for us to go to London for 2 weeks every year. So divide that by 12, and that's what you can pay me." I just love that. "Oh, you can't afford me." And we couldn't. I mean, we couldn't. You cannot buy truth because it's God's gift to give. You can't pay for it. You can't bribe people into it. Daniel shows amazing restraint and conviction to God by telling the king that he won't accept gifts for using the gift God gave him. I think that's just a phenomenal thing there that Daniel does that will not allow him to buy him off. All right, moving on to 18. O King, the Most High, God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. So the first thing, note, God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar kingship and greatness and glory. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind, and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. Okay, so Daniel starts with what God has done. He gave Nebuchadnezzar the kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar's not a Christian at this point. Before he later supposedly said that he believed in God, but when he's Babylonian, he's not a Christian. God gives authority to all rulers,
You said Christian because someone asked me this the other day and I couldn't
Well,
explain it.
follower of God, because there's not really any Christians until
Yeah,
New
but
Testament.
you said that Judaism was really the first Christianity.
No, Judaism is a different religion.
Okay, but the religion of the Jews where Jesus came was the beginning of Christianity.
Well, let me trace it for you.
Okay, yes, yes.
So, Christianity evolved from Adam and Eve down through Noah, okay? And then they were called Hebrews because Abraham was from Hebron, or they were called Yahwehists because God said, "My name is Yahweh, I am who I am." They were called followers of God, followers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all those kinds of things, but not Jews.
Okay, because that's what I said. So I'm like, it wasn't called Judaism back then. That's
No,
what I
they weren't
explained
called.
to them.
If you said Jew, later on, you meant a person from the
Judah.
tribe of Judah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what we know as Judaism, the religion of Judaism, developed between the Old Testament and the New Testament. You can see hints of it in Nehemiah and Ezra, but which are the sort of the last books of the Bible from a chronological point of view, right before the intertestamental period. But mostly, if to find Judaism, you're going to have to read the Apocrypha. Okay, that's where you're going to find some of the Maccabees, and so that's where you start seeing the rise of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all that kind of stuff. When Jesus came, the religion of Judaism had entrenched itself and had replaced Hebrewism or Yahwehism, and Judaism had become the religion, which is a works-based religion. It's a religion based on if you keep the laws, and that's why there's like 640 laws. Is if you keep the laws, then you go to heaven. If you don't keep the laws, then you maybe go to hell. I don't know if they really, not many Jews
But
really
weren't
believe in
all
hell.
the laws written in
No.
in Deuteronomy and
No.
Leviticus and all that?
No, the vast majority of them are written intertestamentally in the Mishnah. Yeah,
But there's a lot of rules in Leviticus.
there's
and all
rules,
those.
but those rules are all designed to set God's people apart
Apart.
from the people who they're living near.
So, but those would be early Christianity rules.
Uh,
That wouldn't be Judaism rules. That would be the Hebrew rules.
Most of what the Jews have as their rules, the rabbis added on to what God had given. Okay, the Mishnah is full of all kinds of stuff that they've added stuff to, and then that's why, and you have to remember why God gave some of those rules, like don't work on the Sabbath. God gave that rule to keep the Jews separate. So while everybody else is going to work on the Sabbath, which was Saturday for them,
But they weren't Jews back then.
yeah,
they
well,
weren't
the
Jews.
people of God.
The
And so he
Hebrews.
gives them these rules and says, you don't work on the Sabbath. So they don't work on the Sabbath. Everybody else works on the Sabbath. Why don't you work on the Sabbath? Well, I'm a follower of God. I'm a Yahwehist. I'm a Hebrew.
Okay.
And so then when we move into the New Testament, now the Pharisees and Sadducees have elevated this idea of separation from the other peoples to some kind of good work. If you don't work on the Sabbath, you're a holier person than somebody who works on the Sabbath. And so Jesus is healing people on the Sabbath, and they criticize him and they say, "You're working on the Sabbath." And Jesus says, "Wait, when David and his armies were out on the Sabbath, and they were hungry and they gathered grain from the grain fields and ate it, was that a sin? Or if your ox falls into a hole, are you just going to leave it down there for a couple of days until it dies? Or are you going to haul it out even if it's on the Sabbath?" And so Jesus' point was, let's not be ridiculous here. And then he says, the Sabbath was given for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the idea of taking a day of rest is for us. It's not that God needs us to worship him.
So did Jesus take a Sabbath day then?
Yeah, oh yeah, he did all the time.
But there was no set day for
Yeah.
Jesus.
I would say as a rabbi, he probably mostly celebrated on Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say he would. We know that like Passover, He does it on. He celebrates Passover with his disciples. You know, he does all that, but the point is the motivation is for us. You know, we need a break. We've got to take a break, and we need to take a break with God. We need to set aside time every day, really, but at least every week to spend with God, because that's what keeps us going. That's what gives us the strength we need. Okay? And so Jesus is trying to tell them, this isn't supposed to be a rule that you get brownie points if you keep. It's a rule for your good. You know, the Jews had taken the Old Testament rules of Deuteronomy and Leviticus and Numbers and elevated it to, oh, these are good works if we do this.
Okay, so you have the Hebrews, the Yahwehs, whatever, and they have their rules and Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. I don't know if those are the three. I don't know. But then somewhere in between the old and the new, then you get the development of the Pharisees, Sadducees,
And the religion of Judaism.
And the religion was Judaism. So why was it named Judaism?
Well, the majority of them would have come out of the tribe of Judah, because that was the southern kingdom.
But the majority of them would have been all the Hebrews too.
Yeah, but most of them were all wiped out. Because remember, the 10 tribes were all wiped out by the Assyrians.
I don't know that, but yeah.
Yeah, the divided kingdom.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
forgot about the Assyrians.
Yeah, the divided kingdom. So after, if you read in First, Second Kings, and you find what happens is David is the king of Israel, which is the united kingdom of Israel. His son Solomon takes over after him. When Solomon dies, there's a split in the kingdom, because Solomon's son Rehoboam is
read about this up there.
right. Rehoboam is won't reduce the taxes, and in fact increases the taxes. And Jeroboam, who was one of Solomon's military leaders, splits off and says, "We're not doing this. We're not financing your high life in Jerusalem." And he takes the northern tribes with him. And so now you end up with the two divided kingdoms, the northern kingdom, which was called Israel, the southern kingdom, which was called Judah, which was primarily the tribe of Judah, was what made it up.
Okay, cool. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And so then as the intertestamental period develops, then the people develop their own religion, because there's no temple anymore, because the Babylonians have destroyed the temple. And they don't know, remember when David wants to build a temple, and God says, I've existed this whole time in the world without a temple. I don't need a temple. And you worry about teaching my word and worshiping and things like that. Don't worry about temples. And they just kept on and on and on and on with the temple. Got to have a temple. We got to have a temple. I live in this fine, beautiful home, and you live in a tent. We can't have you living in a tent. We have to have you in a temple. Well, God, oftentimes when we nag him enough, even though it's bad for us, we'll say, all right, have your way.
But don't you think a place? I mean, like churches, people they need a place to come to congregate together. I mean, they had the tabernacle.
Yeah, they had places
But,
to
like-
congregate, but David wanted something covered in gold and
something
jewels,
lavish.
and yeah.
Kind of like Solomon. Did Solomon?
Solomon built it.
Yeah,
yeah.
Solomon
David
built
wanted it. He never got to build it. Solomon built it.
But
And-
look at how successful Solomon became. The temple.
But that had nothing to do
was.
with the temple.
Well, maybe a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, I was happy with his wisdom.
Okay.
Which, Solomon had, just like every character in the Bible. Every character in the Bible, there's good and bad, right?
Yeah.
There's no perfect person. So Solomon had his good points. He had his bad points. He was an incredibly wise king. He also had a thousand wives and concubines.
He lost count.
Yeah, you don't and that's just for show. Yeah, well, that's the point. It's just for show. Look how powerful I am. I have 1,000 wives and concubines. I have 1,000,000 chariots. I have look how great I am. What happens when people win the lottery? How many people who win the lottery end up going broke?
Yeah.
Because they're so busy trying to live it up and fill this hole that they thought money would fill, and then they get all the money in the world and it doesn't fill it, and they're surprised. They don't understand why they still have the hole, so they buy more and more and more and more, and then they end up broke. I love the story. Danya was, when she was a legal secretary, worked for an attorney who was representing a guy in some civil matters where he was upside down on 5 yachts.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, he had won the lottery and he had bought 5 different yachts and it owed too much money on all of them. It was declaring bankruptcy.
One for every ocean.
Have you ever heard it said that everyone and God made us this way? We all have a God-sized hole in us.
Yeah,
And
Yes.
it's like it can only be filled. Truly, we all have something, but
Right.
He made us so like we seek Him, and it can only
Exactly.
truly be filled with God.
and that's that's
think
the
that's true.
that's the heart of all addiction. Is it why are we addicted to things? Why do we get addicted to things? All kinds of things, because we're trying to fill that hole, and only God will fill it. And it doesn't matter how hard you try with anything else. We were just talking, the pastors today, we were talking about pornography addictions, that it's becoming, I guess Pastor Oliphant told me that the Mayo Clinic had finally said it is a national health crisis.
Really?
That pornography has gotten to the point where it's a national health crisis, because it's causing, they have proven now that addiction to pornography causes depression. It causes all kinds of bad stuff. And we're seeing it, I guess, more and more in kids, because kids all have the smartphones, and the smartphones all get the internet, and how do you police that? It's really hard. Yeah, you can't, unless you're going to lock your kid's phone up, whenever he walks in the house, and you're going to somehow monitor him 8 hours a day while he's at school. I don't know how you police it. It's really difficult. It's not like it was, when Dave and I were kids. You had to go, hang out at the 5 and dime store or the convenience store and get some older guy to go buy you a magazine.
Playboy.
Yeah, and then it was a Playboy, and very disappointing. Well, that wasn't all that great. It was a lot better, because pornography was not just easily accessible. I mean, yes, you could get it. I understand. Because there's always been pornography. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, but
there's
come on.
always been pornography, and you could always get it if you wanted it. But it wasn't just on every street corner and walking around in your pocket all the time. And so it's causing all kinds of problems, mental problems. I'm not beyond relational problems and physical problems and all other kinds of things, but mental problems now too.
Did they ever dig up any pornography stone tablets?
Yeah, actually they have. Yeah, they have in archaeology. You can talk to Shelley about that. But archaeology has discovered pornographic scenes on ancient things, ancient paintings and things, in caves and stuff. Yeah, it's always been there. But again, in our society, we have a tendency, in our culture, not our society, our culture, we have a tendency to say, well, it's always been there, we might as well just legalize it. We might as well just make it okay. Because it's going to be there anyway, we're not going to stop it, so we might as well. And I understand, I'm not saying that I don't understand the rationale, I do. Like prostitution, say for instance. Well, there's always been prostitution, there's always going to be prostitution, so why don't we just legalize it and tax it and make some money off of it? So my first question is,
Negative.
I understand the rationale. You could police it better. You could require health, more, code of health kinds of things, like they do in Clark County in Nevada, things like that. But when we start legalizing things that are immoral, and start saying that it's okay to be immoral if you want to be, I think we're unraveling as a society. I mean, we're already unraveling as a society. We don't need to speed it up.
Right.
I think that's a real problem. It's a different matter of saying should pot be legal. That's a yes. It's a drug. So is alcohol. So is tobacco. So you're either going to try to make every kind of drug illegal and monitored by pharmaceutical companies, or you're going to say, okay, if we legalize beer, we can't make pot illegal. On the other hand, heroin and fentanyl are a whole nother class of things. Those things you take them one time and you're addicted.
You did.
Okay? Or dead. Yeah, or dead. LSD, again, a whole nother thing. Mushrooms, a whole nother thing, because hallucinogenics, you don't know how they're going to affect your brain, and they just because they work fine the first 10 times doesn't mean they'll work fine the 11th. And you can end up with what's it called? Psychotic, LSD psychotic something. There's a name
I
for
had
it.
this old man friend at the old gym I used to go to, Bobby Conroy. And his son at college, just normal kid, partied maybe a little bit, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
took some LSD, whatever, some one time. He brought him in one day for me to the kid was gone.
Mhm.
Done. I mean, done. He's
Yeah.
done for life. One time, and it's true. It's so,
Yep.
and these dumb people say, oh, it should be legal. Someone's saying
Well, it's
cocaine.
illegal to not wear your seatbelt.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that now, what does that say
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
in a culture where you have it's illegal not to wear your seatbelt, but it's perfectly legal to you can pick your poison, but whatever it is, yeah,
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 Well, you know,
that's a really,
yeah, but if
that's
somebody
good.
gets seriously hurt or dies, it costs money. to
right.
Everybody else,
Yeah, that's true.
so I mean, they have a legal right to make that illegal,
All right, we're at 7:00, so we have to
Oh,
end
yeah?
here. We'll pick up here next week. Let's close the blessing. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace. Amen. All right, we'll pick up here next week with